Hey, it's me, Bastian. Welcome to Beyond Best Practice. And today's topic is what's after COMVIK, the future of AI and software patents. And today I have a special guest, Benita Mackay. Hi, Benita. Welcome to the show.
Hello, thank you for having me. As a long-time lurker, it's an absolute pleasure to be invited.
Thanks so much. So you are the one person watching the podcast. That's good to know. So before we start, for people who don't know you, can you maybe tell them who you are and what you do?
I am an AI and software patent specialist in Oslo, Norway, and my background is in physics, AI, and bioengineering.
Okay, that's a cool mix. Okay, physics, bioengineering, and AI. What kind of AI research, or what did you do in terms of AI?
So I was a postgraduate researcher. I did my PhD in applying deep learning specifically to stem cells. So it's a bit of an odd mix, but my original education was physics. So a bit of a strange path through, but it gives you a nice insight as a patent specialist in lots of different fields.
Cool. Yeah. Also on my client base, I see that in the field of medical technology, biology crossed with AI. There's a lot going on. Yeah, so interesting mix. How long have you been working in IP?
About 3 or 4 years now. So I came straight out after my PhD. I thought, this way I get to keep learning about lots of different things without having to specialize even further. So
Cool.
yeah, it's been a fun journey so far.
Awesome. Okay. For the whole audience, one housekeeping remark before we get started. As always, of course, we are recording this session as a live stream on LinkedIn. And everyone, please do me a favor and hit the like button now so that others will be notified. And also, secondly, please put your comments and your questions into the chat box. It's a live stream. And so in case you have any comments, any questions, we will try to answer them as we go. All right. I see one LinkedIn user writing, "Hi, good morning from the UK." So welcome. Nice to have you here. And here's a question for you, dear listeners, dear participants. How should the standard for software patents be changed? That's our main question today. How should the standard for software patents be changed? Just let us know in the comments, and let's have an interesting discussion. So, without further ado, I would say let's get into the main topic now. What's after COMVIK, the future of AI and software patents? So maybe as a quick context, the other day, Benita, you made an interesting comment on one of my posts on LinkedIn, which kind of sparked the conversation we're continuing here today. And you even wrote an article on LinkedIn. And I link all of that in the show notes for people to read up on that if they're interested. So overall, we were talking about, the COMVIK approach, and which is many of you might know the general framework for how the European Patent Office is examining software-related inventions, right? And you were bringing up the idea whether this framework needs to be adapted to better suit new technologies like AI, of course, comes to mind immediately. So let's unpack this one by one. So can you maybe briefly, first of all, explain the COMVIK approach? So especially for folks maybe from other jurisdictions other than the European patent system.
So at a very high level, COMVIK is the established case law at the European Patent Office for assessing inventions that mix both non-technical and technical features. So this comes up a lot with things that are on the edge of excluded patentability. So a lot of your software and business methods, you'll see COMVIK come up during patent prosecution. What that means is they take each feature and they dissect it. It's not very pleasant for us. So they decide whether each feature is technical or non-technical, so whether there is a technical effect. And they only look at the ones which they consider technical. So that is a case of whether the inventiveness and sometimes novelty, but mainly it's the inventiveness, is based entirely on these technical features. And it does give them permission to ignore a lot of your claim, even if you think, and sometimes we think, it is inventive, which is a shame.
That's a great summary, I guess. Yeah. And I think maybe just to add one or two words here. So it's as you said, it's all about the technical contribution, right? You always have to argue to convince the patent examiners that the contribution your patent claim has over the prior art, that has also a technical effect. Only then it kind of enters the end boss, so to say, the inventive step assessment, right? Otherwise, it is just ignored, and that's also funny to see sometimes in examination reports in office actions from the EPO that the examiners just they repeat claim one and they just strike out all the features which they think are non-technical in that sense, and can thus be ignored. Yeah, for me, it's sometimes difficult to explain that, for example, to US people, right? Because it's fundamentally different, right? We don't have this
It's
eligibility thing so much, but it's just different.
very different. And it's not just explaining to foreign counsel either. I have a hard time sometimes explaining to people who are new to the intellectual property world that their idea could be patentable, depending very much on what is found during the search and, frankly, the mind of the examiner on any given day. So trying to explain to them what is a technical effect can sometimes be quite difficult, because you have to explain, well, although this bit is very technical, this bit could be shown, and then this little bit that they extract out, they might decide is not technical. And it doesn't matter that the overall contribution is beneficial.
Yeah. When I talk to AI innovators, so for example, I'm working for a couple of universities, right, and other research institutions who really do, core AI, and they think up new kinds of neural network architectures, the next thing after the transformer architecture, things like that. And when I tell them, maybe at the European Patent Office, all of this is considered a mathematical thing, right? An abstract math and not technical. Then they look at me and say, what? I mean, what's the most fundamental technology we have these days? It's AI, right? Yeah. So there's maybe a little bit of a discrepancy here, what the meaning of technology is, or technical. Do you think? I mean, that's in the end. That would be a question how you would, let's say, interpret or where would be the boundaries, the reasonable boundaries for what is technical and what is not technical, right? Uh, is that the problem, or do you think there's something fundamentally wrong with the COMVIK approach when it comes to new technologies like AI?
I think it's potentially both. So I think the line of what is considered technical knowledge is very much far off. I think if you ask anybody outside the patent system, they would consider computer scientists, software engineers, data engineers, etc., to be technically minded people. This is a STEM subject. And to say that software as a whole entire branch is not technical just seems bizarre. I mean, writing incredible software, it can be like writing poetry. It's incredibly skilled, but it's also technical. As you say, all of our technology is based on this now pretty much, and it's going to just become even more so. That line definitely needs to change. But the method of taking things to pieces and just looking at the contribution of features or even parts of features also seems fundamentally flawed to me, because you can have something that has an overall technical effect. Fantastic, you get it examined, it's not excluded. And then they say, but this small bit that could otherwise be inventive, we're going to say it's not technical, and therefore, hey, sorry, no patent for you, even though it takes a technically skilled person to have invented this. So that feels wrong to me.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm trying to play the devil's advocate for a minute, maybe. So I mean, I guess as a board of appeal member or as a patent attorney, as a patent examiner, one would say probably that, yeah. I mean, you are right. I mean, there is this notion that fundamentally or inherently non-technical features are disregarded, right? But I mean, there's also this notion that I think G1 of 19 said this expressly, that also a non-technical feature as such can contribute to a technical effect in the interaction with other technical things, right? Doesn't that solve that issue, maybe?
I've seen a lot of conflict in this. So I do try and rely on further technical effect personally, but then you get into the realm of technical leakage and arguments such as that. So you have, I think it can be down to the examiners sometimes, at least in my personal experience, where sometimes you can get an argument through and other times they just go, no, I think this is non-technical, therefore it ends here. Whether or not it is linked to a technical effect further down the line can be viewed as irrelevant in that regard. And the problem is with decisions like G119 is that then you have to have it applied potentially to a very specific use case. So if you have something, this is one of my pet peeves, I'm sorry to rant a little bit. If you have an incredible AI system, so perhaps one of these new algorithms or models that your universities are coming up with, if you apply that to something that frankly the EPO seem to like healthcare, you've got a good chance of getting that through. Whereas if you try and apply it more broadly, they'll give you something like, oh, this could be used for gaming, therefore it's not technical, which feels mad, because if this was something physical that had a benefit, but then you could also use it in a game, that wouldn't make it excluded. There are lots of things that can be used as toys that aren't excluded because they are technical by nature. And yet as soon as you're in the software world, suddenly you have to limit these claims, I would say unfairly.
That's a great point. Actually, that's a point I'm struggling with over and over. Yeah, actually, this notion, this which is after G1 of 19, in my view, has become very, very prominent for patent examiners, that they always want to see an explicit limitation to a technical application, right? Or that's also in the guidelines, right? Mathematical features can get technical if they are applied to a technical problem, right? So examiners want to force you to have this technical application, this technical purpose in the claim, and it has to be a specific one, and all of that, which is kind of unfair to me in some sense. Yeah, because as you said, I mean, if I would, I don't know, invent a new hammer, right? A hammer is a technical thing, and I do not have to claim the purpose of putting a nail into the wall. No one would ever ask that if I came up with a new kind of inventive hammer, right? Although I could also use that hammer, I don't know, to within an artwork
Rabbit
installation of some
shadows or what
kind.
have
I
you,
don't know.
yes.
Yeah. So of course there are reasonable non-technical uses of the new hammer, but that doesn't take away its technicality. And I think that's some kind of different with AI at the moment at the European Patent Office. Yeah. Yeah.
And
Okay.
I do think you can take that further as well. It's, if you look at that from the other framework of, if you start off with something that's incredibly inventive in the business world, insurance or advertising, things that aren't quite as liked by the EPO, or the gaming industry, these things could have incredible applications if applied to areas which are potentially more technical, but you cannot claim the entire field. You cannot claim that gaming device. You have to, as a patent attorney, you have your client in front of you and you have to say, oh, well, what technical field could this be applied to? And we'll include that too. But at the end of the day, if they're a gaming developer and they're a very, very small, so a startup, for example, they perhaps don't have the means to prosecute and license out all of these different usages, which are technical, just to try and protect their invention. It just seems fundamentally flawed.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, so while we are ranting, anyways, about the now we have addressed the technical application side of things. There was also on your original LinkedIn article, there was one commenter who wrote. Maybe you can touch on that, and feel free to rant on that also before we maybe come to some ideas for solution to the whole dilemma. The commenter said, this is cool, but I'd settle for updated guidelines for examination aimed at weakening the EPO's reliance on broken technical chain or technical leakage fallacies. What do you think?
Oh, I fully agree. I could limit it at that. There we go. 100%. Moving on. But for those who aren't too comfortable with these terms, broken technical chain, when I said before about COMVIK splitting each of these features into technical or non-technical, sometimes if you have what would otherwise be technical, but there is a non-technical step or process in the middle of that. In theory, they can write off potentially quite a lot. The other thing of technical leakage, a lot of us try and argue that, if you're using technical matters such as hardware, your servers or what have you, or your databases, then things that are relying on that technical structure are also technical. And this is an examiner's way of going, no. So these fallacies, although that's a big simplification, are essentially ways that examiners rebuff our arguments of why something is technical. And yeah, I think this comment is spot on. So I can see James is in the comments. So thank you for that comment, James. I think we're all with you there. The guidelines do seem to not have much on this area. I did have a brief look earlier this morning. I think it would be a lot stronger if there were very concrete cases where they couldn't use this, because otherwise it does seem to be just you can't give your client really strong advice before prosecution as to what kind of arguments are going to come at them, even if you do a full prior art search, because you don't know whether or not examiners are going to apply these standards. And that could also have knock-on effects with validity and things in the future. It would be a lot better for everyone involved to know where these lines are.
Absolutely, absolutely. Clarity is always a good thing. Yeah, absolutely, for all people involved. Now you mentioned that in the article and in our LinkedIn conversation, you mentioned that you'd love a new classification, like, for example, second medical use claims. Now we are coming towards, possible changes, possible adaptations or solutions. And you were talking about second medical use claims, like claim types, maybe where traditional novelty and inventive step requirements are modified in some sense. Can you explain that?
So this stemmed from second medical use. So for those not familiar with second medical use claims, these are used in the biotech field and the chemistry field, where you have a compound which is known. So this is something which is not novel by your traditional standards, but the use of it is inventive. So curing a new disease, for example. And therefore, you have this specific claim type which allows you to patent using this known drug, for example, in a new way, which is fantastic. Society benefits from this. It means that you can have companies putting money in for potential drug discoveries, as an example, where they perhaps would not be motivated financially to do so otherwise. And I do think that there is something to be gained and learned from this. You have, for example, these universities. Universities are fantastic at developing things that society needs and progresses society going forward, but so is the business world and the private industries and everybody outside of academia too. But even then, academia needs financial incentives. They need to stay afloat. And there needs to be an incentive to innovate in these technology fields that we rely on. And at the moment, where you have, it typically comes down to inventive step instead of novelty with second medical use, but where you have inventive step requirements that prevent these really beneficial ideas and processes from being patented, it feels like we need to change the system. We need to incentivize these people to keep innovating for the benefit of society. And currently our patent system doesn't do that. So that was the background of my, let's ask ChatGPT. Let's see what ChatGPT says. And you can tell it was given a second medical use in the prompts with its answer of process innovation use. So not the nicest name in the world. But I think the concept is sound. The idea of having something new, a slightly different framework applied to inventions which are undeniably beneficial, but perhaps don't quite fit into our current novelty and inventive step frameworks.
But again, can you make an example maybe specifically for in the AI field, how that could look like?
So maybe one of these, the next transformer type technology. So a completely new network, a completely new architecture, which would revolutionize across fields. Now, this is technically mathematical. or, it's not limited to just technical fields because it could also revolutionize the insurance industry or business planning. But we can all see what effects these big new models have on the economy of fields across the world. So just look at what ChatGPT is doing, and that is applied to technical as well as non-technical fields. To have a claim that could perhaps cover these fundamental models, these incredible jumps, would be great. But I think we also need an example where perhaps small iterations are also protected, because I think that's important too. So sorry, didn't go too much into an example. I'll try again. If somebody were to improve the known models at the moment, so made them vastly more energy efficient, fine. That would be probably considered patentable. I think most of us would be able to argue, great, technical effect, energy efficiency, okay. But what if we had one that just made it a bit better, made it a bit more accurate? That would make our lives a lot easier. A lot of the effects from that would be beneficial for society. But the same processing power is used, that could struggle. And I'm not going to go into all the nitty-gritty tricks that we could use to potentially get that through, because at the moment, the framework as it stands is, without those tricks, it's not going to get through, because that change is mathematical, it's not technical. There's no real further technical effect unless you apply it to a very specific use case. And that doesn't seem fair. I think there needs to be a claim type where that kind of incremental or larger change, even if it's mathematically based, for example, with the AI, is protected.
Mm-hmm. Do you think, from a practical point of view, do you think it's realistic that such a new claim type would be, introduced into the European Patent Convention anytime soon? And if so, what role do you see for us patent practitioners, for the patent profession in general, in shaping such future policies for AI-based inventions?
I think that, as much as I like the idea, it's not going to happen anytime soon. Even if we were able to pressure the EPO into making something like this, it would come after, realistically, let's be honest, years of pressure from all stakeholders involved. And I do think that includes patent attorneys, but I think that would also include some of your major filers, minor filers too. So big voices for the startups and SMEs who rely on patents, and everybody else involved in the IP system too. I think it would have to be a big collective voice to really get this through. I mean, in theory, you could have a lot of, conflicting case law and maybe a G decision. Again, it takes years. Or you can go for the legislative approach, which again takes years. So I think if this does go through, something like this will not happen anytime soon. That being said, I do think that patent attorneys have an important voice here. We are one of the major stakeholders in the system. And I do think that we can push forward changes. I don't necessarily think it's going to be as major change as a brand new claim type anytime soon. But for interpreting what we currently have, getting slight changes made to the guidelines, those are things that we can do. And we can all argue, okay, we need this to go through. We need this to be an argument that succeeds. And if we all argue that together, applying what we currently have in a good way, then I think we can get these changes made. Not necessarily big ones, but mitigating changes that can help us in the time being.
Yeah, absolutely. But for that, we patent attorneys, we need our clients also to be willing to bring cases on appeal, right? That's what I'm also always telling my clients. So I mean, even if the framework right now might be very, very difficult in certain areas, you have to fight cases through. Otherwise, it will never change, right?
That is one of the things that I do find fundamentally unfair with the system, is how it currently is. I mean, going all the way back to my issues with COMVIK, you often, if you don't successfully have a draft which argues the technical effect of every single minute bit, you can be in trouble doing prosecution. You might have a lot of back and forth, which your client then has to pay for. Which, if it was something physical, that startup, for example, would not have to find the funds for. And
Yeah.
it goes the same with going all the way through to appeal. You can see that the Court of Appeal, at least from what I've seen, tends to be a bit more generous than the examining division as a whole when it comes to what is considered technical. But if you have a small or low fund client who does not have the financial ability to fight it all the way through, it is seen almost as if they're less deserving of protection, which is in no way fair, because a lot of innovation, core innovation, comes from these startups and small, medium-sized companies who the patent system is meant to protect, as well as the big corporate giants who perhaps can afford to take things to appeal more often. So yeah, sorry for the brief mini rant there.
No problem at all. No problem at all. So maybe looking at maybe beyond the European patent system, how do you see other jurisdictions handling these kinds of issues? You know, are there lessons to be learned by the EPO from other approaches, maybe, in your view?
So I'm going to briefly say that my experience with the US and China has been a lot more promising than what I see at the EPO. And that is just for the AI and software side of things. So I find that if I point out to a US or a Chinese examiner, look, this is why this thing is beneficial, this is why it's really good, these are all the possible usages of why this could be good, I don't find that I get restricted to having to claim those specific usage. I don't find that I get my claim torn apart in the same way. If something is perhaps not traditionally technical in a distinguishing feature over prior art, but the overall claim is an improvement over the prior art, I find it's more likely to go through. And I think that is sensible. I think that if the EPO were to apply that approach, that perhaps these other large jurisdictions are applying, it could really benefit the AI ecosystem, the innovation ecosystem in Europe. Also think that, shout out to any Norwegian examiners who are watching, the Norwegian Patent Office is really trying hard in this area. So I recently had a mention, I can't go too much into it, but it was a particular architecture improvement, and that could be applied for software or hardware. And that, I was a little bit worried about that. I really emphasized the hardware in case we had to fall back on that. But the claim was not limited to the hardware in the end. They said, yeah, absolutely, this is great, this is inventive. So it's not only the technical knowledge of the examiner, understanding the difference between this improvement and the different algorithms of the prior art, but they could see that the overall benefit of this improvement to AI was great. And I think if smaller nations, if their patent offices can make these changes, aligning, of course, with the core EPC, then perhaps the EPO might follow suit as well.
Let's hope and see. Let's hope and see. We have some questions in the chat, actually. So maybe let me pick two of them and I'll just read them to you and then you can maybe comment. So one commenter, Bernd Haberlander, is writing, there is always some good reason or purpose to develop a new AI system. The clue might be to properly evaluate, exhibit such reason and purpose in view of existing systems and point out internal features which provide related benefits. What do you think about that?
Agree completely. I think that this is how you get things through the EPO and internationally. The problem comes when these you have a similar according to the EPO prior art, and then they say that these differences are non-technical or the benefits are not limited to a specific technical use case. And whether or not the law as it stands means that they have to do that doesn't always change that is what they are doing. Now, there are a lot of incredible patent attorneys out there who will be able to get that through. But if you have a client that simply can't afford to have that back and forth, often you have to go for something really limiting just to get it passed. So you appease the examiner, you go, yes, okay, we will limit to that specific use case, which doesn't seem fair. So I completely agree with you. I wish that was enough, but in my experience, sometimes it's not.
Then there's another comment. Adrien Marcon is writing, this second use second AI use solution, as he writes, makes me think what could be needed is a new type of IP right tailored to software AI that would aim at covering technical character in whatever sense, but also aspects like copyright on the code and or input-output data and trade secret aspects. Wow.
I love this idea. I think it's great. I'm not sure what you'd need to have a massive international, because it would have to be international IP, right? Yes, I don't want to know any lawyers involved in the chat as opposed to pretend lawyers. Please let me know what would be needed there. But I think, yeah, if that was something that perhaps WIPO could be looking into, I think that would be fantastic, because trying to explain to, I'll go back to the startup example. A startup, not much knowledge of IP, trying to explain to them, okay, this copyright will cover this specific thing, but this won't cover X, Y, Z. Your trade secrets are going to do this. You can't do this. You can't tell potential investors in your meetings this without NDAs, etc., etc. And by the way, patents are great because then you can talk about that after it's published. But by the way, it's probably not going to protect this, this, and this. It's a nightmare. It really is. And then you have to worry about all these other laws that perhaps patch up these spaces, but are different for different jurisdictions. I completely agree with you, Adrian. I think if we could have something that was out there specifically for software and AI going forward, that would be great. But my question back to you would be, how on earth do we future-proof that? I mean, going back to my PhD, how algorithms have changed even in that time is mind-boggling. So how would we make sure that this right was tailored for decades as opposed to just where we are at right now?
Yeah. I guess we won't find an answer to that question in this podcast today. By the way, time is flying. So we are already nearing the end of this episode. I always try to keep those episodes under 30 minutes. So we are already slightly over, but that's okay because it's such a fascinating topic. Last question to you, Benita. What's your advice, practical advice to patent applicants in the software and AI space?
I think it might still be nice if things were different. COMVIK is here, it's being used. Things like technical leakage and broken chain are here, they are being used. So right from that initial draft for the European Patent Office, because although I'm sure people will shout out other jurisdictions which are stricter or just as strict, that is the one that you need to be thinking about. So every feature, every potential little difference that could be distinguishable over the prior art, make sure you write down a potential technical effect or a plausible technical effect if you're not sure. Maybe ask a European patent attorney, just give you a list of things which are absolutely technical. And then at least you have something in the application that you can fall back on if worse comes to worse.
I think that's great advice. Cool. I couldn't have said it better. Cool. Okay, so time to wrap this up. Benita, where can people find out more about you and where can they get in touch with you?
Please check out my LinkedIn page. You can all message me there or have a coffee with me in Oslo if you want a physical chat. But if you Google Benita Mackay Norway, you should be able to find me that way as well.
Cool. And I'll also put all the links into the show notes. Coffee sounds nice. All right. So that was an awesome session. Thanks for coming on the show, Benita.
No, thank you so much. It's been really fun.
Okay, cool. So let's wrap this up. So that's it for today, everyone. Thanks for taking part. Thanks for the comments in the chat box, and check out the links in the show notes for the follow-up resources we mentioned throughout this episode. And see you all next time. Bye-bye.